Chicago Bears are making moves. NFL free agency right around the corner. But what are we waiting for? Tons of moves around the NFL, people getting cut, people getting traded, people getting signed, people getting extended, and the Chicago Bears are right in the middle of it, and we are going to dive into it here in our first section here on Sports Talk Chicago. First things first, I thought I was coming on here talking about Jonah Jackson today. I was like, how am I going to do 20 minutes on Jonah Jackson? Until this morning, I'm taping this on a Wednesday, the Chicago Bears have traded for all-pro guard, Kansas City Chief, Super Bowl champion, Joe Thuney, is now a Chicago Bear for a fourth-round pick. And before you jump out of your seat, it is a fourth-round pick in 2026, not this season. So the Kansas City Chiefs, from their perspective, why are they making this deal? They have one of the best centers in the NFL in Creed Humphrey. They just signed him to an extension. He's the highest paid center in the NFL. A lot of Chicago Bears fans were hoping that it was going to be a different Kansas City Chief that they were going to target with Pro Bowl guard, 26-year-old Trey Smith. Well, the Kansas City Chiefs franchise tagged him. Looks like they're going to work out an extension with him, so something had to give in KC. And it turns out it's 32-year-old, possible future Hall of Famer Joe Thuney moving on and now moving to the Chicago Bears. So let's just take this one step at a time. And I am on a disciplined trek and path this offseason to stay as disciplined as I can and skeptical as I can about the Chicago Bears. But this is a piece of good news. Let's start first with the Jonah Jackson deal. On Tuesday, the Chicago Bears traded for Jonah Jackson from the Los Angeles Rams. They gave up this year's sixth-round pick, which is most likely going to be the pick they're going to get from Pittsburgh for Justin Fields. Jonah Jackson, 2 years ago, signed a 3-year, $51 million deal with the Los Angeles Rams after becoming a Pro Bowl player in Detroit under Ben Johnson in 2021. And to be very fair, Jonah Jackson, the Pro Bowl was a bit like the Mitch Trubisky Pro Bowl. He wasn't exactly named to the team. Someone got injured, and he was one of the rotating replacements that got in there. But Pro Bowl nonetheless. And as the years go on, keep that in mind, Bears fans, that when you're in bars talking about Jonah Jackson and a buddy of yours says Pro Bowl Jonah Jackson, let's keep in mind there's a little bit of an asterisk there. But looking at Jonah Jackson's tape, there's a couple things that you can definitely like about him. He's a left guard. When he pulls to the outside and runs the ball, he's got some speed to get out there. It's very interesting. He's a good run blocker. He can play really nasty. So what exactly happened in Los Angeles that now has him on the Chicago Bears? Well, last season he was injured multiple times. It wasn't just one injury that limited him to 4 games last year. It was multiple injuries across the season. And to be very, very fair, I don't know if we can pin this 100% on Jonah Jackson per se. But when you look at it, when he got healthy, he didn't get back on the field with Los Angeles. A lot of people were saying that he was benched. Well, there's 2 ways to look at that. One, if you remember, the Chicago Bears beat the Los Angeles Rams early on in the season last year. And I don't think the Rams team that the Bears played then was the Rams team that ended up at season's end going to the playoffs and giving the Philadelphia Eagles a really hard time in that playoff game. So I think conventional wisdom says, well, Jonah Jackson got benched and couldn't play on the Rams. Well, not necessarily. If a guy's been hurt all year and you bring in a guy to play left guard and you get things cooking a little bit and you find that rhythm, why mess with what isn't broken? And it just turns out that I think that Jonah Jackson was on the outside looking in by the time he got healthy at the end of the year. And by all accounts, Jonah Jackson was a great teammate in Los Angeles, and the Los Angeles Rams simply wanted to move on. The Chicago Bears have cap space. They're able to take on this kind of money. And now all of a sudden he's a Chicago Bear. Do I like the move? To be honest with you, I think it's pretty meh. And I wish I could be a little bit better with my vocabulary, but this definitely feels like a Ryan Poles type move to me. By acquiring Jonah Jackson is very similar to a lot of the type of philosophical moves stylistically that Ryan Poles has done in the past. Find a guy with, in theory, a high ceiling. A guy who, in theory, to quote Jed Hoyer, could outperform his projections. A guy whose arrow is pointing a little sideways or even pointing a little down, and hoping that you can rebuild some type of value and get more out of what you're paying for, which is a 6th-round pick and money. It's technically a 2-year deal. He's owed $17.5 million this year, which I think actually against the cap is about $14.5 million. And then he's got a deal for next year. No guaranteed money in that second year. For Jonah Jackson, this is a 1-year deal at best. But this also feels like a guy a little bit who has a lot to prove, and you're just kind of hoping and banking on him being back in a system that he's familiar with, him getting his health together, that he can come out and become a solid football player again. The question will be, and we'll get to Joe Thuney in a second, where is Jonah Jackson going to play? Which brings up a very, very old, well-worn issue here in Chicago of bringing in offensive linemen and then asking them to play at a position that they haven't played majority of their career at. Jonah Jackson has experience at center. Okay, whoop-de-doo, great. I enjoy the versatility in a pinch on a rainy day, but to then just plug him in there and expect him to be successful at the NFL level, I think is asking a lot. The Chicago Bears do that a lot in this town. Ryan Poles brings in guys like Ryan Bates, who can play right guard, center, can play a little bit of everything. Well, what's his real position? If you have multiple positions, do you actually have one position that you're really good at? That would be my question for Jonah Jackson. The other one on top of that, and look, keep in mind here, Bears fans, you cannot have it both ways on this one. If you do not like the Jonah Jackson move, but you were defending every single corner and crevice and cranny of Ben Johnson and his decision-making, you're at an impasse there. That does not align. This Jonah Jackson move has as much to do with Ben Johnson's preference of a player that he wants as it is Ryan Poles going out there and specifically targeting a guy like Jonah Jackson. Ben Johnson and Jonah Jackson, they played together and they made sweet music together and got a great running game going in 2021 before he moved on and signed a big-time deal with the Los Angeles Rams. Jonah Jackson signing says as much about what Ben Johnson wants as what Ryan Poles wants. And it's interesting and it's fun because now we can turn the hourglass over a little bit on Ben Johnson and his talent evaluation. Because patient zero is now going to be Jonah Jackson and how that works out. Granted, again, it's a 1-year deal. I think it's probably a get-me-through year. And I will say on the positive side that I'm not so sure about Jonah Jackson as the player, as the fit, as where he's going to actually play on this offensive line. But I do like the fact that he will be a guy who will walk into training camp, probably the starter at one of the positions on the offensive line, and it does provide more flexibility for the Chicago Bears to attack the offensive line and or defensive line in the draft and not necessarily feel like they have to force a guy into the lineup if he isn't ready. This provides them a little bit of flexibility. If they want to take a center or right guard of the future who doesn't necessarily have to play right away. This doesn't force Kiran Amagaji into a game right off the jump. These guys can sit a year, learn a year, and especially if you take an offensive lineman high in the draft, it might be a good medicine for him. People forget all the time when we talk about the Detroit Lions offensive line, and specifically their best offensive lineman, in my opinion, Penei Sewell, who was drafted very high in the draft. But people forget that during training camp, and that first half of that first season, Penei Sewell was getting whipped all over the field, all of the time. He got through the bumps, he found his way on the other side, and then became the Pro Bowl player that he now is. So if you're a Bears fan, and you're excited about Caleb Williams, and you're tired of waiting around on rebuilding projects, and this stuff takes time and patience, from an offensive line perspective, Jonah Jackson at least accelerates that. and creates a little bit of some insurance if you do want to go younger in the offensive line. You just don't have to put that youth out there on the field right away to start next season. And I do think that that is good news, and I think it is good business from that aspect for the Chicago Bears. And when you talk about accelerating the possible timeline of the Chicago Bears competing next year, let's get to Joe Thuney. For those of you who aren't familiar, Joe Thuney is the type of offensive lineman that really ties the room together. He's that rug, ladies and gentlemen. He is the leader. And I think without even walking into Hallis Hall, he's probably leader in the clubhouse, if not already the automatic leader of the offense and the offensive line. Roll the clocks back last year if you can. And if you're driving, hold on to the wheel because I got to talk about Matt Eberflus for just 1 second. Roll the clocks back to last year when they had a leadership council of 8 captains. 8 captains getting together, solving problems, solving crimes, not winning football games. How many offensive linemen were on that leadership council? 0. Make that make sense. So here comes Joe Thuney, a guy who has guarded the behind of Tom Brady, the backside of Patrick Mahomes, has been to Pro Bowls, has made all pro teams, something that we a little are foreign in familiarity with that definition here in Chicago. And I think the dude's on his way to becoming a Hall of Famer. If you want some statistics, we can do it. If you look at his pass block rate on Pro Football Focus or his run block rate in Pro Football Focus, he's a top 10 offensive lineman, top 5, top 4 in a lot of different categories. Over 1,100 snaps last year. He gave up 0 sacks, and he had 1 penalty. How does that sound to you, Chicago Bears fans? And with the Joe Thuney signing, it's just different. I've been doing this for a while on this show about the type of offensive lineman the Chicago Bears target and bring into the room. And how serious are they about actually fixing that problem? Joe Thuney, I get it, 32 years old, is a serious move. Is a move that shows the Chicago Bears are serious about actually attempting to fix the problem. Whether they do it or not, I can't answer today, and no one will. No one, if anyone has the answer for you on that one today, they're lying to you. But hypothetically, Joe Thuney perhaps is the most impactful move Ryan Poles has made as a general manager outside of drafting Caleb Williams. I think it perhaps could be bigger than trading for Montez Sweat. And it could be just as important, we'll see, about the Carolina trade. Because what he just does is he just stabilizes and matures the room up really quickly. There are already former players on Twitter sending compliments and advocating for the impact Joe Thuney can have on a locker room. Not just for the offensive players on the line around him, about the accountability factor, something the Chicago Bears locker room desperately needs, and also the impact that he has had on the 2 quarterbacks that we go back and forth with of whether they're the greatest of all time between Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. When you look at the guy's resume and the places that he's worked, they're pretty damn impressive. And again, with Joe Thuney now around at 32 years old, he's got 1 year left on his deal. I do anticipate, maybe even by the time you're listening to this on Saturday, he might already have an extension in place. My guess it's probably going to be a little bit more of a short-term deal with a high annual average salary, somewhere over $20 million, maybe a 2-year deal, $45 million, something along those lines. Don't worry about it, Bears fans. Even if they do that, plus the Jonah Jackson deal, they still will have over $53 million, I believe, to spend on salary next year. So you can spread that around in a lot of different places and still get an impact player on the defensive line. In part 2 of today's episode, after the break, I am going to break down my favorite free agent defensive line choices, and we are going to talk a little bit as well, just a second, about who else they could possibly add to the offensive line. So let's talk about the cons on this one, because this is good news. What is the downside of these two acquisitions? Well, a couple of things. Let's take it from like a broader perspective for a second. This again shows either Ryan Poles' willingness or his reticence when it comes to the NFL draft. Willingness from the Ryan Poles perspective of trading draft capital. He has done it now a lot. This is a part of his makeup. This is a little bit of who he is, which can be exciting for Bears fans because every NFL trade deadline, we are going to anticipate Ryan Poles making some sort of move. But when you look at it, he's traded multiple second-round picks. Over the last year alone, he's traded a second-round pick, multiple fourths, a fifth, a sixth-round pick. So he's got a willingness to trade them. The question that I would probably have is, does he have a bit of a reticence in his confidence level to actually select good players in the draft? And I've done this before, and we'll bring it up again. Name me how many Pro Bowl players Ryan Poles has selected in the draft. I'll hang up and listen, because the answer right now is 0. I think we've all got our fingers crossed and our toes crossed that Roman Dunze and Caleb Williams will eventually become Pro Bowl players. I think Darnell Wright's got a pretty decent shot at it. Kyler Gordon's got a pretty decent shot at it. But again, some of these guys, they're entering their third year and still 0 Pro Bowls. So there is an aspect of this where I get it that bringing in these guys creates some flexibility in the draft. I think that is a good thing. But again, when it comes to Ryan Poles, can we have the ultimate confidence in the world that he is going to ace this NFL draft coming up in 2 months at picks 10, 39, and 41 specifically? Because I'll be honest with you, if this thing is really going to work and if this thing is really going to turn around, between 10, 39, and 41, I think at least 2 of those you got to hit on. And I think you can't have one of those be an absolute dud. I just think you can't have it. Look, it happens in the NFL, but the position that Ryan Poles is in now, you got to really ask yourself, you got to start hitting on these. The other part about the Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson thing is something, and this is a tale as old as time in Chicago Bears football, is that they're both left guards. I understand that Joe Thuney kicked out to left tackle last year after Juwan Taylor had an injury for the Kansas City Chiefs. The results were a little mixed. He's 32 years old. He's a professional. He could probably do it, but you just basically doled out $35 million to 2 guys that play the same position. And this drives me nuts from a Chicago Bears perspective because there's some sort of, it doesn't matter who the general manager is, there's some sort of vibe where you drink the water in House Hall and you just think you can move these guys around and it isn't a big deal. Tevin Jenkins, they moved him around one position to the other. Kyle Long, Pro Bowl player, they moved him around from one position to the other. Cody Whitehair, all of a sudden maybe he can play center. So we'll see what happens here next week. And I can't wait to do next week's episode because I think we are going to get some new Chicago Bears news, and maybe they sign a center. But are you going to really honestly pitch to me we're going to make Jonah Jackson play center now, a position that he's barely played, and then he's going to be competent at it and good at it? And if he is, as I just said, he is a one-year stopgap player. Does that really fix the problem that you're trying to solve here with Caleb Williams for the long haul moving forward? Sure, maybe you can draft a center later in the draft and bring him along, but it's a patchwork again. Is he a right guard? He hasn't played a ton of right guard. Is that a great fit either? So there's some questions here. I know that we love to say versatility is a good thing. As I get a little bit older, honestly, I just want guys that are really good at their craft at the one position, and can we just let them play that position? Chicago Bears seem to not think so. So I do have some questions here of whether that's going to work just in a concept of redundancy and moving guys into new spots. Are you still going to maximize what you think you're getting on paper if you're putting them into new situations and new environments? It'll be interesting to see. And here's the last piece of this before we take a break is the guy that Chicago Bears fans on Twitter and in bars and in cars and at work have been talking about for the last couple of months is the center from the Atlanta Falcons, Drew Dahlman. He is 26 years old. According to Pro Football Focus last year in pass protection, he ranked as the number 22 center in the NFL. I'll be honest with you, that's pretty mediocre at best, but he was number 4 in run blocking. He missed some games last year with an ankle injury. In the 9 games that he did play, he didn't allow pressures. He didn't allow any sacks. He would definitely fit a bit of the mold of what the Chicago Bears are trying to do right now, which isn't build this explosive, high-flying, passing, vertical offense. It's to get down back to the basics of running the football and intimidating through power running. Dahlman can run zone, run scheme concepts, but he has the technique to also bully some people on the inside. Behind him, there's Evan Brown with the Seattle Seahawks. Again, a stopgap guy, a guy to kind of maybe get you through the year. If you bring in a guy like Evan Brown, which is definitely possible, Bears fans, you got to think that they're going to target somebody to try and develop in the draft. If you go after Drew Dahlman, you are going to be paying him a lot of money. It'll be Joe Thuney and Drew Dahlman not that far away from him. The most a center right now is making in the NFL is $18 million with the aforementioned earlier in this segment, Creed Humphrey in Kansas City. That dude is worth every penny. The question for us with Drew Dahlman is he worth that $18 million? Because that is what his agent wants right now. And look, maybe my final thought on this before we take a break here is it is tough when you are in a position of desperation. And I think Ryan Poles and Bears fans, we are both in the same boat on this one. You know, you don't really know what you got when it is so bad in the past. Like, I can promise you right now, the Chicago Bears offensive line will be better than the one that was trotted out there on the field last year. How much better? I can't exactly say right now. So when we're talking about a Drew Dahlman, yes, there are plenty of different ways to poke holes into his game. He did have some injuries, ankle last year, not great news, but still only 26 years old. Some people think he's an elite center. Some people think that he's an above average center who probably will get overpaid. And there's other people that don't even think he's quite that good anyways. But the bottom line is he better than what we've been trotting out there the last 4 or 5 seasons? Yes. Is he better than Sam Mustipher? Yes. Is he better than Lucas Patrick? Yes. Is he better than Coleman Shelton? Yes. It is not our money. And if you want to sign him to a long-term deal, there are ways and there's flexibility right now with Caleb's rookie contract to make that happen. If you're telling me right now, the Chicago Bears, which is official, have Jonah Jackson right now, have Joe Thuney, have Darnell Wright. They add a Drew Dahlman. And then they attack the draft with offensive linemen and defensive linemen. So I'm talking multiple offensive linemen. You can still take a guy at 10 if you want to. I'm not sold on Braxton Jones, mostly because of his health now, not because of his ability. His ability was always, I thought, was pretty mid, pretty average. But now we're in a position where is he a guy that you can count on to be healthy heading out of camp? And maybe that's where Joe Thuney is going to go, left tackle. But now you can target a guy at 10, at 39, at 41 on the offensive line. You could play him right away. You could sit him right away. But he doesn't have to carry the whole world on his shoulders because he's going to have some vets around him to protect and guide him. And you can maybe walk and chew gum at the same time by getting younger while also bringing in older guys. End of the day, look, I'm going to be I'm in show me mode with the Chicago Bears, and nothing else tells me otherwise. That they do not deserve our optimism or our benefit of the doubt. But also at the same time, I have to be honest, this is a really good day for the Chicago Bears. Jonah Jackson is one thing. We can all talk ourselves into that one. But I'm being serious with you right now. Joe Thuney, that is a smart move. He is a Hall of Fame player. The dude will be a leader automatically in a room that desperately needs it. If you have your criticisms or complaints about Caleb Williams and his personality, or whether he's going to be a good football player or not, we're going to find out a lot. And I think Joe Thuney is going to help out that message. So before free agency even hits, the Chicago Bears, we don't know by how much yet, but we do know that as it stands right now, before free agency, the Chicago Bears have gotten better, and they have gotten better at a position that I so desperately have wanted them to get better at. The offensive line, protecting Caleb Williams, getting that run game going, and maybe, I don't know, scoring some points in the first quarter for once. And for right now, we don't know by how much, but it is a good thing, and the Chicago Bears have gotten better.